Hello, everyone, and welcome to the One Mind Dharma Guided Meditations and Talk podcast. My name is Matthew Sokolov, and if you want to learn more about us, you can visit www.oneminddharma.com. We have podcasts, our free 30-day meditation challenge on YouTube there, links to our coaching and whatnot. If you want to work with me for individual sessions, you can visit themindfulcounselor.me or visit oneminddharma.com and click coaching. So today I wanted to talk, I'll start with, there's a meditation that goes with this talk. I'm not sure if it's going to be before or after this in the podcast feed, because sometimes I mess up the orders of the episodes, but it should be either before or after this. But I wanted to talk about self-compassion as it specifically relates to mindfulness practice, not necessarily as a standalone Brahma Vihara or heart practice. And the meditation podcast episode that goes with this is just that, a little bit of practice bringing metta or loving kindness into our mindfulness practice. This quality of gentleness and patience and kindness. And of course, when metta meets joy, it becomes mudita, or sympathetic joy. And in a sense, when metta meets suffering or difficulty, it becomes compassion. So if you're interested in actually practicing, I recommend trying that. But I wanted to talk about this for a few reasons. I see a few students and clients, and it seems like in the past 2 or 3 weeks, self-compassion has been called for quite a bit in my work with people. It's also something I've had on my list of podcast episodes because it was something that I really did a deep dive with probably like 1.5 years ago. And I'll talk about that, how it changed my mindfulness practice a little bit. So my experience with this is that I have this is what happened to me. I have 2 kids. They're currently aged 4 and 2, 4.5 and 2.5. And they're doing normal kid things, right? They don't listen all the time. They fight between each other like siblings do. They're testing their independence, which I understand. And I noticed myself getting quite angry, feeling this kind of like frustration bubble up into anger in me so often with things that I know that are logically or rationally quite normal kid behaviors and how they learn. And so I tried really bringing mindfulness to this, watching this kind of seed of anger arise, watching this frustration or irritation grow into anger or rage in my heart or mind, in my body as well. It's a great practice, right? Something mindfulness offers us is this ability to notice when we're experiencing something like anger, when we're just frustrated, or noticing anxiety when it's just beginning to arise and we're just a little bit worried or maybe preoccupied. However, I was doing this and I was noticing it well after some time, like really noticing this is beginning to get to me. I'm starting to kind of rile up. And it felt like I was just observing the process happen and it was happening anyways, which is growth and is great. But I was talking to a teacher of mine over a course of this period, and they suggested bringing some self-compassion in those moments. That we see if I could actually notice like I'm feeling irritated or angry and care for that. This like tender self-compassion, like, oh, this doesn't feel good. this is suffering and dukkha, and I don't enjoy this. It's unpleasant. I'm having aversion. But like to really kind of bring a heart quality to it. I think that what I thought was that, and I continue to think with so many things, is that if I can just understand this pain or this difficulty, whether it's an emotion or bodily experience or something in my life, if I can just understand it, it'll go away or cause me less suffering. And I think to some degree, understanding and clear insight into our experience is beneficial, obviously. It's what mindfulness offers us. But without compassion, without self-compassion, what I really was experiencing was this form of aversion, this form of wanting to be rid of it. I'm going to rationalize it and think about it and understand it so hard that I can get rid of it. And what was really called for and really benefited me was actually having some self-compassion, being with the pain and discomfort of it with an open heart, acknowledging that it was painful, acknowledging that it was suffering. And what this did for me was it actually allowed me to be with it more wholeheartedly, to kind of dive a few levels deeper, see the fear that was underneath the anger, the me not liking the feeling of not having any control in those moments. And I think that self-compassion really opened this door to allow myself to care for myself in those moments, which made me less reactive. And it did lead to deeper understanding, as I was not as wrapped up in aversion. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit today is bringing self-compassion to our mindfulness practice when there's something difficult going on. To soften the heart and really be with the discomfort or pain or suffering. Not so that we can get rid of it, not so we can push it away, but just to practice responding to ourselves with some level of kindness and gentleness. So if you've listened to any of our episodes, you probably know I'm about to start with the etymology of the word. I think it's interesting where the words that we use come from. The word compassion comes from com, which means with, and passio, which means suffering. So it literally means to suffer with in the English language. So to be present for, to hold. I've heard it said that compassion is like quivering of the heart, allowing ourselves to feel a little bit of the pain or discomfort and be with it. I think about the way when one of my children gets hurt, actually hurt, you pick them up and you hold them, and I don't tell them like you shouldn't do that in that moment, or you should not run, or you should be careful, or I just hold them and let them cry and love them, right? Just being with the suffering, not trying to fix it in that moment, not trying to put any blame, not trying to figure it out, just holding the pain or suffering. This tender compassion. And then I also think it's interesting that the word that is used in Buddhist texts, karuna in Pali, the prefix kar, K-A-R, actually means to do or to make. You may recognize it from the word karma. So there is kind of an active portion of compassion, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But at its very simplest or most basic, the action part of karuna or compassion is to show up with an open heart, right? To pick up my child and hold them. To recognize in a moment of anger that I'm experiencing anger, and to take the action of opening my heart, recollecting my attention and placing it on this anger to see how I can respond with gentleness and kindness. Dr. Kristen Neff, who is awesome, she does a lot of research on compassion, that is, especially self-compassion, that is just absolutely amazing to me. She's written a few books. She has a newer book about fierce compassion, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But she's really at the forefront of compassion research as far as neuroscience goes and putting people in fMRIs. And in her view, there's 3 elements of compassion, and I love this. There's self-kindness, which she talks about metta and loving kindness. She also uses the word gentleness, which I think is a great word for this aspect. So the first aspect of self-compassion is this gentleness or this kindness. To me, gentleness is kind of at odds with reactivity, with judgment. Gentleness brings this patience, this loving kindness, patience. The second aspect of compassion or self-compassion, she often describes as the common humanity of it. That this is part of the human experience, right? I'm using anger as an example, but we can use anxiety, we can use fear, we can use physical sensations like back pain or knee pain. All of these things are part of the human experience. And sure, not every human has knee pain or back pain or anxiety or anger. But in general, it's just part of the human experience. We don't need to take it personally. I think there's a bit of anatta in this, of not self, right? So not taking it on, not I'm angry, but rather there's anger present. Oh, anger is an emotion, an experience that happens to humans. So really not owning it, not taking it on ourselves, but recognizing that it's just part of the human experience. The same way that as we practice concentration, you'll hear many teachers, including myself, say it, when the mind wanders, we just bring it back. It's of the nature of the mind to think and process information. It happens. And it's the same way with anger, anxiety, fear, pain in the body, whatever it may be. Not taking it on. Meeting it with gentleness and this understanding that it's part of the human experience. So self-kindness, common humanity. And then the third element of compassion, as she lists it, is mindfulness. So observing, watching it, getting to know the patterns of thinking and of difficult emotions. There's a quality of compassion, when we really think about it, that isn't just being kind and gentle, isn't just recognizing the common humanity, but is really present with it, right? Going back to the example of holding a hurt child. Holding the hurt child and not like being on my phone or something, but really being present with it and noticing what's going on with them and allowing that in and observing. In the same way, we can think of the example I use of kind of feeling the frustration bubble up into anger with my children. For me, one of the steps that was missing was this self-kindness step, especially. This gentleness. I was observing it, but with this kind of tightness or with this resistance to it. I definitely didn't recognize the common humanity. So I think sometimes with self-compassion and mindfulness, and she lists them in with mindfulness as the last one, and I don't think they're in any particular order, but when we're practicing mindfulness and self-compassion, they go hand in hand, the self-kindness, the mindfulness, the common humanity. To observe something with this level of gentleness that we're able to, and this level of perspective of wise understanding or wise view on it, that it's part of the human experience. we hear those common like metta phrases or compassion phrases rather. May I be free from suffering, or may I be present with this suffering. May I care for, have compassion for this suffering. And we used to go on a metta retreat every year at Spirit Rock. We lived in Los Angeles, California at the time. And I've told this story before. I really wanted to go on the Insight retreat. I forget who, Joseph Goldstein was leading it. I think that there were a few other teachers I liked on it, Brian Lesage or someone. I can't remember. And I really wanted to go on the Insight retreat. And my girlfriend at the time, Elizabeth, wanted to go on the Metta retreat. I had no interest in going on the Metta retreat. So we flipped a coin, which seemed like a nice, fair way to do it. And we went on the Metta retreat. A 10-day Metta retreat at Spirit Rock. I think we were like 23 or 24 years old. And it absolutely changed my practice. We actually, when the next year came up and she said, do you want to go on the Insight retreat this year? Because we went on the Metta retreat last year. The answer was no, let's go on the Metta retreat. And we went on the Metta retreat many years in a row at Spirit Rock, the 10-day Metta retreat. And what it did for me was I had focused so hard on kind of what I shared at the beginning. If I can just understand these patterns of thinking, if I can get this mindfulness piece down, I can relieve a lot of my suffering. But I had completely missed the heart practices, both as standalone practices. I mean, I did them here and there when we went to meditation groups or listened to guided meditations. But I never really worked hard to cultivate them or had the faith or belief in them. And I certainly wasn't actively bringing them into my mindfulness practices. In the last year I was on the Metta retreat, one of the teachers offered the phrase, "You're welcome here." Just to offer that to our suffering or difficulty when it arises. And the instruction we were working on in that period was actually a mindfulness practice. We were doing an open awareness practice. And the teacher said, if you find a difficulty or a difficult emotion or experience arising, instead of the traditional compassion phrases, try offering "you're welcome here." Kind of to combat this resisting or tensing up around these experiences, whether it's the mind wandering or regret or whatever it may be. You're welcome here. May this anxiety be welcome here. And in my mindfulness practice, I found it to be an incredibly useful phrase. I still use it most of the time I sit. Because what it allowed for me to do was to take these difficult or unpleasant experiences, what some people might call negative emotions, and actually allow it to be there and observe it without this level of aversion or resistance. A little bit of a like less cloudy mindfulness. I could see it a little bit more clearly and gently, less reactive. I was able to have a little bit more equanimity, noticing when I was getting knocked off balance. So I offer that to you, just to offer during your practice. You're welcome here when something difficult arrives. And one of the things that came out of that last Metta retreat we went on, which was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, was that I really realized I needed to do more heart practices on my own. That I realized the lack of doing heart practices was causing me suffering. And I think that Kristen Neff talks about this in her most recent book so well. She talks about tender compassion, kind of what we've been talking about, this tenderness, and fierce compassion. That sometimes the way compassion looks, taking that car of karuna, sometimes how compassion looks is we really need to take action. And for me, what that looked like in that moment was I really need to make the heart practices more of a priority in my practice. And I really need to bring them into my mindfulness or insight practices. Not out of aversion, not out of trying to get rid of something horribly, but out of care for myself. So this fierce compassion is a calling to actually take action. Kristen Neff, I was listening to a podcast episode a while back, and she was talking about, I forget why, but like not getting great sleep in that moment or in those days, and realizing that she was really suffering. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was kind of like a little bit frustrated or irritated. And having tender compassion in that moment, but also this fierce compassion of, okay, I need to sleep. I need to make sleep a priority. And the way that looked for her may be different than what it looks like for you. I know getting sleep isn't always easy for everybody, or as easy as just making a decision. But sometimes we have to make a change out of care for ourselves. There's this quality of observing tenderly and just being present for the difficulty. And there's this quality of, can we do something to not cause ourselves suffering in the future? I've definitely had this many times in my life with many things where, okay, it's time for something to change. It's time for me to make a change to lessen the suffering in my life or the suffering of someone else, right? We can make a change out of compassion, not out of fear, not out of anger. I think it's important to understand the concepts of near enemies and far enemies. The far enemy is something that can be understood as like the opposite quality, and the far enemy of compassion is like hatred or cruelty. The near enemy, I think, is interesting, a quality that seems similar but isn't quite it, and that's pity. Pity is a few differences between pity and compassion, and whether we're talking with others or self-pity or self-compassion. Pity is not founded in any action. When we pity someone or pity ourselves, there's no intention of acting, there's no intention of doing anything. I also think that pity is othering. When we pity someone else, we're putting ourselves on a different level in a sense, whereas compassion is fully empathetic and without like any hierarchy of any sense. So in the same way with self-compassion, in order to practice self-compassion and work towards something, there needs to be this action piece, this showing up to really be present for, and an openness to taking action to lessen the suffering. And there needs to be this empathy, not looking down on ourselves, not looking down on others. So to wrap up a bit, what can we really do here? How can we bring compassion to the forefront of our practice a bit more? So of course we can sit in heart practices, in the traditional Brahma Viharas and metta or self-compassion practices. In mindfulness practices, when we're meditating, we can set the intention at the beginning of metta or loving kindness. One teacher that's impacted me greatly, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, he often starts doesn't matter what type of meditation, every meditation he does with a bit of metta or loving kindness, just to set the intention. Whether he's doing a heart practice or he's doing a concentration practice or he's leading an open awareness practice, he starts with this metta to settle the mind on this intention of gentleness and kindness. So during your sitting practice, see if you can do that. Start with a few minutes of loving kindness or self metta. And when you are observing and you do notice a difficulty arise, whether it's something rather big, like a difficult emotion or memory, or something relatively small, like the mind wandering off and the judgment that may come from that, use it as your call to action, to take action and respond with an open heart and with gentleness and kindness and compassion. Offer a phrase in that moment. Oh, you're welcome here. Remembering the three elements of kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And then in our daily lives, I'm guilty of this, and a lot of the people I meet with are. When you go and grab mindfulness out of your toolbox, right, you're feeling activated or anxious or flustered or impatient or whatever it is. When you grab mindfulness out of your toolbox and you take a deep breath and you try to be aware of what's going on or come back to the present moment, don't just grab mindfulness out of the toolbox. Grab some self-compassion. Bring it along every time you bring mindfulness along. Some care for yourself. So I encourage you to investigate this both in your formal practice and, of course, in your daily life, just bringing compassion along with you. If you have any questions, you can reach me at matthew@oneminddharma.com. You can visit themindfulcounselor.me for individual sessions and oneminddharma.com for many other offerings. Thank you.